Hey everyone, my name's Andy Rasman. Welcome to episode 100 of Reconnect. It's a big milestone number. The episode stopped at 99. I took about a 3-month break, so if you've been around for a while, you know there's been nothing new, but I'm back. Hopefully we'll keep this going a while, try to release an episode a week, releasing them on Tuesdays like I normally do. So if you've been listening through the duration of this podcast, thank you so much. If you're joining in for the first time, thank you as well. I pray that you'll get something out of this that will be a blessing to you. I want to start episode 100 with something that I should do more often, and that's give a thank you and shout out to the band that made the bumper music that I've been using for all these episodes. That band is Joyous Wolf. You can go to their website, joyouswolf.com, check out where they are. They're actually on their first national tour right now. They just started it, and they will be opening some festivals for some big-name artists like Ozzy Osbourne and the guys of Stone Sour and Rob Zombie and Five Finger Death Punch and Mastodon. So they're going to be sharing the stage with some big-name rockers and rollers. Two of the members of that band were former students of mine, Robert and Craig. God bless you guys. I pray that you rock out hard and enjoy your national trip. And I always got the association that you guys were Christians, so I pray that you can stand on Christ during this tour and share the light of Christ with those that you meet. I got to see Joyous Wolf play this summer at the Whiskey A Go-Go, and man, they really rocked out hard. And they didn't play the song You Wouldn't Dare, which is the bumper music for this podcast at that show, but I really enjoyed what they were doing, so check them out. They let me use their song for free. It's really cool to get some non-copyrighted, or I guess it's copyrighted, just royalty-free music that I can use. All right, guys, episode 100, kind of an important episode, you would think, so I decided to actually go an interesting route. I made an episode for myself. Of the episodes I've done so far, the one with Joe Bongiorno, the author of Black Sabbath, The Illustrated Lyrics, Volume 1, was my favorite interview because with that interview I was able to marry two of my favorite topics, theology and rock and roll. And so I wanted to do something like that again, so I had Joe Bongiorno back. He has a second volume to this series that he's doing on Black Sabbath lyrics. So I read that second book, and I got a great list of questions, and he agreed for me to interview him again. So that's what I decided to do for episode 100. Made it something that, would be something I really enjoy, something that because I have this podcast, I can actually interview authors like that I really enjoy reading and who've challenged me in several ways from their work. So, just revel in that fact that this podcast is as much for me to learn and grow as hopefully it is for all of you listeners. And I hope through this episode you will see how Christ will be shared, how the good news is proclaimed, even through such an odd source or unexpected source as Black Sabbath. God bless you all. Thanks for listening and making Reconnect what it is.
Welcome to Reconnect, the podcast dedicated to sharing and defending the good news of Jesus Christ. All religions except Christianity require mankind to work to overcome our greatest problem. It is in Christianity alone that we have divine redemption through the person and work of Jesus of Nazareth, who through his life, death, and resurrection defeated sin, death, and the devil forever. Reconnect us, O Lord. Hey everyone, my name is Andy Rasman, and I am interviewing Joe Bongiorno. He is the owner and operator of the Royal Publisher of Oz, where he publishes illustrated fantasy books and illustrated rock lyric books. And you can find more information about his work at theroyalpublisherofoz.com. And for this episode of Reconnect, I'm going to be interviewing him about his most recent Black Sabbath book, which is volume 2 in an 8-volume series, so he's only got 2 out right now. And this one is volume 2 of Black Sabbath, The Illustrated Lyrics, Songs of Protest and Apocalypse, which explains the lyrics of Black Sabbath's second album, Paranoid. Some of you might be shocked if you're normally following me for the Christian stuff, for how I got a Black Sabbath themed episode for my podcast Reconnect and on my YouTube channel. But I think you will end up being shocked as we talk about this if that's you. You can also go back to another interview I did with him for Volume 1, which was episode 68 of Reconnect. It's on iTunes. You can also find it on my YouTube channel there. And so, Joe, first question for you. I noticed you opened Volume 1 with a Bible verse, and I thought that was really cool. That's what first got me to buy your book, because I opened it on Amazon. The preview showed me a Bible verse, and I go, this is interesting. A Bible verse at the start of a Black Sabbath book. And I just happened to email you, and I found out you were a Christian. And I was like, cool, I'm very interested to see where he's going with this, because I know Bill Ward is a Roman Catholic, has a Christian worldview, and that comes forth a lot, and a lot of people don't see that. So on this book, you also did a Bible verse start, and you chose Ezekiel 3:17 to be the first text you gave for the book, which reads, "Son of man, I've made you a watchman for the people, so hear the word I speak and give them warning for me." Why did you choose this verse to kickstart a book about songs of protest and apocalypse?
Good question. Just a slight correction. It's Geezer who's Catholic.
Did I say Bill Ward?
You did. It's Bill, Tony, and Ozzy are Protestant of varying denominations. But so to get back to your question, the idea of a watchman, at least in ancient times, was somebody who watched and warned.
Okay.
They sat vigil and they sounded a warning if there was a threat. And sort of metaphorically, in a biblical sense, it was a prophet who denounced mankind's sins and sort of brought the people back to God because they had gone astray. And that's sort of what Sabbath are doing. Which we'll get into a bit with their lyrics. And in this day and age, that's also an act of protest, because those who would want us to stay asleep would prefer that. So it's sort of also an act of protest in this day and age.
Interesting. So, in terms of it being a protest, apocalypse album, you wrote in your book that Black Sabbath songs are ultimately polemics infused in a discourse of apocalyptic literature, which has implications both ancient and modern. There's the ever-present reminder that there is hope and a greater purpose at work. So that's a little clip I pulled from your book there. So I was hoping you could explain more what apocalyptic literature is, and how the fact that it's apocalyptic somehow gives us hope, despite the very evil, depressing topics of this book: war, drug addiction, even problems like with us wrecking the environment and all the other sorts of things that this album talks about. Like, where's the hope in that somehow?
It's there, and it's in apocalyptic literature itself. The genre goes back to post-exilic Jewish times. So the Book of Daniel is really the first example of apocalyptic literature. Following that, in the Second Temple period, you've got the Book of Enoch, sort of a very, very influential apocalyptic work. And then, of course, the Book of Revelation, which Sabbath draw heavily from. And it's in all three of those examples, including Sabbath's lyrics, which are themselves apocalyptic in nature, many of them. There is the sense that all the things that you just mentioned, sort of all of sort of the darkness that's sort of engulfing this world, is there. It needs to be confronted and will be defeated. Ultimately, in the end, by God. Sort of we do our part, and He does His part.
Yeah, very good. And I know the Book of Revelation, the 7 churches, every church is told, stand firm till the end.
Right.
And they're all promised some sort of blessing from God. And so that very much is it. Despite the chaos in the world, stand firm in Christ, and he's going to make everything right. And I look forward to hearing how you're going to unpack that a little bit when we talk about the song War Pigs.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the others down the line. You mentioned that these songs of protest can also be songs of lament. And you quote Ozzy as having said, when someone identifies with a downer song that I'm singing, they're able to put their energies into the music and relieve their frustrations. It's good therapy. If I make people feel good, I feel good. The band and the crowd gets off on each other, and it's a tremendous trip. Peace, power. And you mentioned in the book, many people might find it hard to equate peace, power with Black Sabbath. Can you help explain why people don't make that type of connection with Black Sabbath? And maybe give some examples of what we should be looking for in order to see peace, power in Black Sabbath.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of us, meaning fans, never quite got past the name. You know, we just didn't see past that, and we heard the musical style, and we made assumptions, and those assumptions became how we interpreted the band was. And it actually couldn't have been further from the truth. And a lot of fans are much more aware of that now. And as far, you asked for an example, and I think a good one as far as peace, power is concerned, which we'd have to jump ahead an album to Master of Reality. Children of the Grave. That's really, I think, the closest one that we have that discusses how individually we show the world how love is still alive.
Nice.
That's one of the closing lyrics on that song. And then, we jump ahead to another album, Under the Sun suggests that that's something that we can't achieve alone. I don't believe in violence. I don't even believe in peace, he says. Now, it seems like contradictory statements until you take the body of their work as a whole and look at it and say, all right, well, what are they actually saying here? Peace, power is achieved. And this we see on this album at the end of Electric Funeral, that final stanza, and into the Void, going back to the Master of Reality album, where it's that's not something that we interpret. That's very clear in the lyric.
Yeah.
Find a home where love is there to stay, peace and happiness in every day.
Yeah.
So it's explicit. It's not something that I'm pulling out of nowhere. It's right there in the lyric.
Right there. And what was interesting, I think some of it people don't see it as well because of the imagery that's commonly associated. Like the album covers don't always look peaceful. The shirt you have on right now for Volume 4 has the most peaceful image where you got this outline. Is that Ozzy?
That's Ozzy.
Okay, so like he has the peace fingers held up. Apart from that, most of the imagery seems spooky, kind of like what we talked about with Volume 1 with supernatural horror. That's usually what the imagery is. But in your book, you said despite what the album covers typically are, the most common symbols that Black Sabbath uses are the cross and the peace sign with the fingers.
Yeah.
So how do these symbols fit into the context of songs of protest and apocalypse? Because protest, I mean, especially now with some of what we're thinking of with protest in America, those things usually get pretty violent now, the way things have been going.
It's that duality again. And there's always been, for every positive thing, there's a negative side, it seems. And that's the case with protest, too. The protest that at least the ones that Sabbath have always spoken about, and speaking of Children of the Grave, there's a good example of it, is peaceful in nature. It's strictly peace-based because they are very anti-violence. But that said, the songs aren't just about protest. There's that duality of salvation sort of coming at the end of it all.
Yeah.
which is what we saw in the civil rights movement, those songs, and the old sort of anti-war movement songs back going to the late 60s or mid-60s. Similar kind of thing happening there, lyrically and if not musically, because musically Sabbath's in a different place. But the duality aspect is, all right, well, our part is, we be peaceful, we be loving people, and that makes for a strong family, strong communities. And then God does the rest in terms of the powers that be.
Right.
It's not our job to overthrow them. And that's something I think that we'll maybe even get into a bit more.
We'll definitely touch on that. Well, let's dig into the album a little bit. I just want to walk through each song. I had some questions from reading your book on it. Just initially, for people, if they're not familiar with the song War Pigs, before I ask questions about that song, what is the song War Pigs about?
Retribution. Specifically, God's retribution against what's described in Isaiah and Revelation and Acts 4, the kings of the earth. The war profiteers, the political leaders, the military leaders, the weapons manufacturers, any and all who support the war machine. So the song is a wake-up call to the rest of us to get out of that if we're not, in it, to stay away from that, essentially, because God's wrath is going to come upon them. So let's not be a part of that.
So kind of, I think you just used the words like war machine, or the whole aspect of war. So from your writings on this song, and it was mostly quotes that you pulled from members of Sabbath. I think it was mostly Geezer and Ozzy on this one that you had pulled quotes from. I kind of interpreted, I came to a different understanding of what they might have meant by this. It seemed to me that their quotes were saying all war is evil. And so when the song starts out by generals gathered in their masses, it's not just generals who are fighting in a certain way, which would be unethical. It's that all generals are unethical. All forms of war are evil. Is that a correct assessment from what I was reading from the book, that they would basically bold blanket statement, all war is evil? There's not a time where it could be just?
That's such a good question, and the answer is yes and no. They are specifically targeting man's wars in the modern era, possibly in older times as well. But it's clear that they're not completely against the idea of divine war. Because they're looking forward to and anticipating God's war on the powers that be and their puppets.
Okay.
So, what they're basically condemning is the idea of war as the thing that makes Satan the happiest. It's the thing. It has all the things he loves best. It's got deception, it's got mass murder, it's got mass rape, it's got greed, despair, domination. It creates a legacy of evil that resounds throughout the ages. We're still seeing the effects of World War I today in 2017. So just to show how long-lasting the evil effects of war can be. So they're speaking specifically about man's war on man.
Okay. So you said divine war. So I'm just curious, like I know in the Bible there were times where God sent his people in to do battle or to do war. Sometimes it was even him raising up other nations to bring down his people because of their sins or their going astray in some way. Do you think any of that applies to some of the wars today, where there's times where we could say that's just God working through governments to raise and lower, and to would they be open to then say like World War I or II? Could there have been certain sides or generals where hey, that could be a just war? Just curious.
That's a good question. I actually wrote an essay on the just war theory. It was for a Star Wars anthology that's coming out. I can post a link to it later on.
That'd be good.
But I'm going to say that there's a lot of people who misunderstand what's going on in the Old Testament, and they tend to view God as a sort of dark God or an evil God for doing, and that really comes from a lack of understanding of the ancient world. To properly understand the Old Testament, you have to understand ancient Mesopotamia, the ancient Levant, Egypt, the Aegean, that whole ancient world, and then you have to understand the context of works like Genesis, and specifically Genesis 6. And if you really even want to go deeper to understand Genesis 6 better, it's helpful to understand the Book of the Watchers from First Enoch, which really puts a context to understanding what was at work in the nations of the Amorites and the Rephaim, and particularly what supernatural, and by that I mean dark supernatural elements, were at work in these nations. So, we have no problem condemning the Nazis and celebrating their destruction, because we recognize sort of the vast evil that they represented. And yet the Canaanites were far more evil for a far longer period of time on a vaster scale. So, again, we have to understand the broader context of what was going on in the ancient world. And most of us don't. Most of us who are criticizing the Old Testament generally don't have that knowledge.
I heard one person say once that it would even be akin to if some of the things the Canaanites were doing were happening today, most of us would be the atheist would be going, "Where's your God? Why is he allowing this to happen?" And it's like, oh, wait. So you have a problem if he allows it to happen, and you have a problem if he has it ended through people going in and annihilating the culture and society. So it's kind of like we're stuck in a hard spot. Either way we answer, people are going to be against God and upset.
Yeah, that's their choice.
Very cool. I like how you answered that. Any thoughts on Romans 13? I heard. I do want to talk about this a little bit just because it was a big part of your book. And it certainly challenged me a lot because the way you wrote the book and the way you had the quotes, and you really drew into question my understanding of just war. And is it, like, I always understand war's evil, but there's a time where, like with Ecclesiastes 3, there's a time for war and a time to kill. One of your quotes that was from Angel Flynn, the director of General World Outreach. I assume that's a she, maybe Angel's a he, I'm not sure. Violence and killing are immoral and unethical no matter what the reason. I'm just curious, like, how you would compare Romans 13 there, because in Romans 13, God gives the government the sword. It says all authority has been placed by God, and that these authorities have been given the sword to punish evildoers. And so some of that is, when you read that chapter, it seems like it's more for the individual in society submitting to the government.
Right.
But at the same time, governments seem to have a protection for the whole as well. Part of the sword is to protect the whole of the people, and that may come through the government raising up an army and things like that. So what's your thoughts just on Romans 13 and this? Is it okay sometimes to kill? Like, maybe bring it personally to like a Christian in the military. Is it okay for that Christian to serve as a soldier in the military, almost regardless of the country? And in some countries like South Korea, Christians in South Korea, they don't have a choice. It's by law they have to serve. I don't know if they have a Muhammad Ali get out of military, go to jail card in South Korea. I don't know if it works that way for them.
I think that's an individual conscience matter, and one that really needs to be taken seriously by everyone every Christian who's in the military and everyone who's considering it. And it is a very serious matter because we are talking about very large issues, life and death issues.
Yeah.
Physically, spiritually. But getting back to Paul was speaking to an audience who at this point was already aware of what Matthew had written and certainly what Daniel had written. And both of their views of the political powers. I mean, Daniel likens governments to beasts. John does that later on in Revelation as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a direct correlation. The wild beast in Revelation. So Paul understood that, and his audiences understood that. However, that didn't give and doesn't give us license to be lawbreakers. The government may be good, bad, indifferent, depending on the time period. Usually the former, or indifferent, right? But in either case, no matter what, it does not give us license to break the law, except when it breaks God's laws, and that's where we part company. At that point, we render Caesar's things to Caesar and God's things to God. I don't have the quote in front of me. Martin Luther Jr. Spoke I think very well on this subject of the relative submission that we have to government. That we should be good citizens.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. But when they ask us to do something that breaks God's laws, that's when we put our foot down and say we obey God as ruler rather than man.
Yeah. Very
Acts
good point.
5:29.
Yeah.
Just remembered that.
Yep. Last question on War Pigs. You cite the Bible a lot on this one. I think Revelation was cited the most. What are some of the biblical connections then for War Pigs?
The idea of cosmic darkness that precedes the Day of Judgment. War Pigs and Electric Funeral both reference this, and that's like throughout the Old and New Testaments. That's everywhere. That idea, which whether it's literal or metaphoric or both, it's cool imagery. I could see why they used it. But what I was really fascinated to discover was that the song's comparison to the political military leaders being witches and sorcerers. That goes way back to the book of Nahum. Let's see if I have a quote somewhere. Nahum calls Nineveh a harlot, the mistress of sorceries who enslaved nations through her sorcery. And then Isaiah refers to Tyre the same way, and then Ezekiel and Jeremiah refer to Jerusalem in that same way. And of course, in Revelation, that same language is used to refer to Babylon the Great and the kings of the earth who fornicate with her. So I thought initially, for most of my life, I thought, that correlation of likening them to witches and sorcerers was just something that came from the earlier Walpurgis lyric. And it does. But its application has biblical connections. Ones that I believe Geezer knew, because Geezer specifically says that the inspiration for his lyrics come from the Bible. And again, that's something that I can send you a link to in case people want to know, hey, where did he say this? Where's Joe getting that from? I have the direct web page where he's interviewed, and he says that. So again, we're not pulling this out of nowhere. It's there, and it's just fascinating that it's extrapolating from these very ancient books.
That's so cool. What's interesting too, I think, is from my kind of understanding. I haven't dug too deeply into too many bands, but from what I see or understand, Black Sabbath basically created what people would call heavy metal, or created what would be called doom metal. Some people even say, that song would be the start of thrash metal. All these different metal genres. It all traces back to Black Sabbath. And it seems that a lot of these metal bands, maybe because of the type of music it is, it's hard to have lyrics about. It's hard to have Beatles-style lyrics, pop song lyrics, with this style of music. And so they write lyrics that, in many ways, I think not just copying Black Sabbath's music, they copy the type of lyrics they wrote, and at least in the themes. And it's so interesting because some of these other bands, they don't have the Christian Bible grounding that Geezer Butler had with his writing.
Right.
So it gets really distorted when they do it sometimes. So it's almost like they don't know it, but even these other bands are tracing back to the Bible. It's pretty interesting the way, like, it's almost like God had a sense of humor when he did that, you know? I think.
Tony once joked that God created heavy metal, so there you go.
And I got that because from your first book, you had a line that stuck out to me where it was Bill Ward saying that he believes God wanted a Black Sabbath because the genre, everything about their system, they weren't supposed to be successful, but they were.
Right.
So that's where I get, there could be a little sense of humor from God there, that all these people, you know, are actually going back to the Bible if they trace it far enough back. He's like little breadcrumbs back to himself if people want it.
I think so.
Next song on Paranoid is the song Paranoid. I never understood this song because I thought paranoid was what I typically think paranoid means. You're afraid of everything. You're thinking someone's out to get you all the time. And in your book, you said that in the 60s and 70s, for the British, being paranoid meant you were a depressed person. It was linked with depression more so than the proper definition of paranoid that we use. And so I never really liked the song too much because I like the longer songs like War Pigs. So this was just kind of a fast song. You even had quotes from them saying this is a throwaway song. They were just jamming, and it happened to get on tape, and they made them make it the album cover name and everything. So once knowing it meant depression, I actually like the song now.
Yeah.
It changes. It means so much more.
Lyrics can elevate or lower one's appreciation of the song.
Yeah.
I always thought that was interesting.
So, would you like to speak on what you learned about depression then from researching this book, and in particular what you learned from what's in the song, what you know about depression? How should the church then respond to a depressed person, maybe in their congregation or even in their community? Because I think oftentimes we do tell people, kind of like you were saying in the song, or like in your book, just go have a couple beers and lighten up. And it's like, well, I've done that already, and maybe that's why I become an alcoholic. So I need something else.
Yeah, I think the church, and if you're not part of a community, then your family, your own personal community of friends or students or co-workers, given the high suicide rate, and I lost a friend recently to suicide, so
Sorry to hear that.
it hits close to home. It's something that should be treated very seriously. And there are, depending on the degree of depression, there are various ways to go about getting help for it. But in the severe cases, speaking to a psychotherapist is really the best way of diagnosing what the issue is and getting the most immediate help as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. Because time is a factor. And it is interesting that when you go back to late 60s or mid 60s Birmingham, and it wasn't just true then, it was true here in the States as well. PTSD, chronic depression, all of that, they just thought you were crazy. They thought something was wrong with you. You need to get over it. You need to have an AL or several. That was their way of treating it. It was suppress it. And thankfully, we've come out of that now. But suicides are still going on. The depression rate is still very high. Taking it seriously is the answer, I think, for all of us.
Good. Yeah, that's probably the best answer, right? I mean, especially as Christians, we don't want to downplay and be like, oh, you just need to pray more. You don't have enough faith. It's like, whoa, really?
Yeah.
Like,
I've
it's the
heard
wrong
that.
answer.
Yeah.
Definitely the wrong answer. Well, to not be on Paranoid much longer, Planet Caravan I thought was pretty interesting. To be honest, listening to the song, I can't understand 90% of the lyrics. Like, how I don't know what they're doing vocally there, but listening, I can't understand most of what's being said. When I actually got to read all the lyrics in your book, it's a very beautiful song. This is excellent poetry. Would you mind talking to us a little bit about how Planet Caravan's been interpreted? I know it's probably one of their most covered songs too, from what I've seen.
Surprisingly, and this is the Sabbath that radio listeners just will never hear, because commercial rock radio will never play a song like this. And these kinds of songs, I actually did a little chart thing with all of Sabbath's sort of mellow, moody songs. And it comprises a good quarter of their material. They did a lot of it, and it was all different. None of it was ever the same.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not counting the 13 album, obviously, because that Zeitgeist is also kind of very close.
Yeah.
But just speaking specifically and strictly of their 8-album canon with the original 4 members, they never repeated themselves. So it is a very unique song in their canon, and it is gorgeous musically, lyrically. And I've read people and heard people discussing the lyric and saying, "Oh, it's pretty poetry," and sort of leaving it that. Which you could leave it at that, and say it's pretty poetry and sort of move on. But I don't believe that Geezer has ever written a superficial lyric, and I don't think any real poet, does. There's always layers underneath it, and if you want to probe that, that's what my book is about ultimately.
Yeah, definitely, it's about that.
Yeah, you're not required to. You can just totally flow with the sort of cosmic vibe that he's painting there, but it's there. And when he was asked about it, speaking specifically of Geezer Butler, he gave 2 very seemingly contrary opinions as to what it means.
Yeah.
And he does this a lot. And part of me thinks he's playing a bit with the interviewer, as well as playing with the reader, because I think he does want you to think a bit, and not just go superficially. So the one interpretation he gives, the earliest one that he gave, is very close to what Into the Void turned out to be, which is, a group escaping, a war-torn planet, sort of into the cosmos. And then the later interpretation he gave was a romantic getaway. And you say, where's he getting that from? And now, interestingly, Zeitgeist is more about a romantic getaway into the stars. But both of those ideas, if you want to go really deep into it, are really metaphors, and this is true for Into the Void very explicitly, are metaphors for death and transmigration. They're songs about entering the afterlife. So, again, that might be too much for some people. That's fine, but it's there if you want to delve that down the rabbit hole.
So I noticed there was a section in this one where you particularly did show this is about Jesus, at least how you were interpreting it. Do you mind speaking on that a little bit, where you saw Jesus in this?
I do these things with great caution. Any interpretation is subject to error, and one should never be dogmatic when it comes to it. So I hope I'm not being, and I wasn't in the book. However, I have to use my intuition when doing this kind of thing. And in this case, I kept drawing parallels with certain lyrics back to Behind the Wall of Sleep, which you and I discussed in depth the last time, which is such a cool lyric.
Yeah.
Now, in that song, there's that one stanza that says, Now from darkness there springs light. Wall of sleep is cool and bright. Wall of sleep is lying broken. Sun shines in, you have awoken. So this song, Planet Caravan, speaks about while down below the trees, bathed in cool breeze, silver starlight breaks dawn from night. Both songs are echoing the idea of dawn's light dispelling darkness. And those are ideas that, again, come from not just the book of Revelation this time, but also 2 Peter, which is very sort of, Jesus as a light shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises. So that's just where my mind goes. Take from it what you will.
Yeah. I just wanted to throw it in the mix of interpretations. I thought it was pretty good stuff when you wrote it down in the book.
Thanks.
Next, very popular song, Iron Man. You made a connection to Iron Man to transhumanism, and I hadn't caught that before. I hadn't thought of that. So, what's transhumanism? I'm sure some listeners, if this one's being video too, but so if they followed a little bit, I've covered transhumanism with a couple guests. But if they're not there, if a new listener, what's transhumanism and how's Iron Man linked to that? And with that, is there any lesson we need to glean from that? Because as you said, it seems as if these are songs of apocalypse, pointing to there's something going on now, and there's somehow some hope that we can have despite whatever the conflict is.
Right. Transhumanism is the idea that through science and technology, we can evolve into gods. We can become superhumans that are no longer subject to disease, old age, death. So Iron Man essentially goes through this process because he needs to survive the rigors of space and time travel. But the enhancement, while it does make him into a Superman, truly it does, it also kind of turns him into a bit of a monster whose every thought is bent on revenge against mankind. So it's an implicit idea in Iron Man that transhumanism is not a good thing. It is much more explicit, I think, in End of the Beginning. But I think also Shockwave and even Supernaut really kind of look at this a bit, at least from what I can see. The idea that transhumanism is a counterfeit salvation.
Yeah. Yep.
It's antithetical to everything that Sabbath is on about, which is the idea that salvation is coming from God.
Yeah, it doesn't solve the heart problem of sin.
Right.
So now you're going to have war, except now we're super God. Now we're not humans battling this. We've gone beyond humanity, but we're still going to have the same issues because our hearts haven't changed.
Right. And now look at the damage we can do.
Yeah.
As a result of our enhancement.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's interesting stuff.
And it goes back to Nephilim, if you really kind of want to trace again back to Genesis 6.
Genesis 6. Yeah, I should have a talk with you on that sometime. Have you on just to discuss that, because
that would be fun.
I was curious your take on it, and I'm kind of getting it right now, just hearing you reference it a couple times. Going back to Jesus, because my show's about Jesus, sharing the gospel, you mentioned that some conclude Iron Man to be a metaphor for Jesus. So, I don't know, maybe some people hearing this, if they're not normally following my show, I'm thinking some people may be listening just because it's Black Sabbath. They may be going, come on, Jesus, you're pulling this out of everywhere. So how can you explain that, Jesus out of Iron Man?
Yeah, it's not my theory or hypothesis, and I certainly don't. I don't want to discount anybody's interpretation unless it's so ridiculous and out there. And for some people, this might be that ridiculous and out there. But that said, if you reinterpreted all of the lines, you could draw a hypothesis out of the lyrics. I mean, Iron Man is rejected by mankind. He actually, his whole purpose was in saving mankind, and there is an idea of sort of retribution at the end. So I get it. I see it. I don't personally, buy into it, but I think it's fascinating. And I think it's more fascinating, too, that, how one song, just one lyric that seems pretty simple on the surface, and this is true if you ask about Fairies Wear Boots, if we discuss that, similar kind of thing. It's like one seemingly simple lyric has put forth a really profound amount of interpretations. It's almost like a David Lynch movie, or series. You could extrapolate so much from it, and that's just a sign of great writing. It's just great writing.
Yeah, you can think on it forever. Yeah,
Days.
I kind of thought that Jesus. I definitely don't think it was intentional to be Jesus. I don't think Geezer sat down and said, "Hey, let me write a sci-fi version that could depict Jesus." But I personally see this like I interpret Jesus to be the hero of the monomyth. So where I think any hero you will find somehow represents Jesus.
Right.
So like you said, coming from another place, another time, he comes to save mankind. The line that really made me think, this does seem more like a Jesus thing is it appears as if he's dead, but he comes back to life,
Right.
And it's interesting when Christ returns, it does fit like what you saw at the end of War Pigs and what we're going to see in the next song we're going to discuss. There is retribution for all those that rejected him. And that's like really brutal to say, just straight up, like God's coming for you. So it's almost like you can tone it down a little bit when you put it in this like sci-fi imagery and just kind of let it sit there. It's easier to say, makes it more receptive maybe.
Palatable.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
So the next song is Electric Funeral. What exactly is the Electric Funeral? Like, I never really got what that was. How does that link to the song necessarily?
There's almost two. There's this idea of duality that's running throughout this album is really fascinating to me. It's something I didn't discover until years later, because I've been listening to them since I was 11, and it's fascinating that in years to come you can still extrapolate new things.
Yeah.
But
thanks to you, I can. All the work you're doing.
Thank you. But there appears to be two. There's the counterfeit one, which is the atomic or nuclear bomb. So there's man's idea of destruction, which is utterly indiscriminate, and then there's God's destruction, which is very discriminate. That's specifically against the wicked. And I think it's all in that last stanza. It's the same thing with War Pigs. You can't truly unlock the song until you've read that last stanza or listened to that last stanza and said, now you have to go back again to the beginning of the song and you say, all right, this is all part of a larger picture here. Mm-hmm. It's brilliant.
Do you know that last stanza from memory, or do you have it? I know it's Supernatural King.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. I never understood the lyrics.
Yeah. Supernatural King takes earth under his wing. Heaven's golden chorus sings. Hell's angels flap their wings. Evil souls fall to hell, ever trapped in burning cell. So, and it's preceded by sort of God and sort of the angels sort of coming.
Yeah.
Their arrival on the scene when mankind is at its lowest point.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very unsettling lyric, but also ironically one, a really hopeful one. it's not dystopian, as some commentators would suggest, because of its utopian elements. Utopian in the way Tolkien wrote the word EU, not you, EUTOPIAN,
Yeah.
which meant which is the opposite of a catastrophe, was a happy, joyous thing. But yeah, what else about the song intrigues you?
I just thought it was interesting because I don't know why. I've never looked the songs up online. We live in a day and age where I can do that and find it. When I started listening to the band, the song lyrics weren't in the CD sleeve that I had. They weren't on the album that my dad had that I remember. They were for Master of Reality, so I know all the songs. I know all the lyrics to that album because I had them.
Right.
And I just have never gone through to actually look them up. And what I found most intriguing in this one, I didn't even know they were saying Electric Funeral in the song. I always heard them say, magic do wrong. Magic do wrong. Magic do wrong. And I'm like, yeah, the generals are like witches, and this magic, it does wrong. And I never even heard Supernatural King, which completely changes. I don't even know what I heard. I'd have to hear the song, and then come to me, oh yeah, that's what I'm hearing. But it changes everything. There's a supernatural king who takes earth under his wings. Wow, amazing. And the evil souls fall to hell, so there is salvation for those who haven't aligned with the war pigs. It's a really cool. It makes the whole album a concept album, really. And I never really picked it up so much in as much detail because I didn't know it was about supernatural king coming. I'd never heard that for some reason.
Right.
And now that I heard it, I'm like, oh, this is just War Pigs Part 2. I didn't know it.
Right.
Which is another interesting element of apocalyptic literature. There's cycles. Depending on how you interpret it, everyone interprets like Revelation slightly differently, but my understanding of those other apocalyptic texts, which aren't in the Bible, there is a series of things that repeat. So with Revelation, it's 7 bowls, 7 trumpets, 7 seals. My understanding is those are actually the same thing shown from different kind of imagery. So it's kind of cool. Like this is an apocalyptic album. You nailed it with the word choice. It's so good. With the evil souls falling to hell, ever trapped in burning cells. That's it's a tough image to swallow. You spoke in the book of annihilationism.
Yeah.
And it seemed as if you wrote about it as being a very real alternative to a forever cognizant, I know I'm suffering burning. Just curious, is that a position you hold? I know one person that's been on my show has been wanting to talk about annihilationism some, so maybe just kind of hearing your take on it could be a precursor to having a full-blown episode on it in the future.
Nice. I'll look forward to that episode too. Yeah, I've always felt, even very young, that it was incompatible with God's love. The idea of Him eternally torturing somebody, I always default to that old sort of standby that if you had a dog that attacked people, that bit people. As it turns out, I do. One of my 2 dogs, at any rate. Your first step would be to find, any way possible to get him to stop doing that. And if it didn't end, if it didn't get better, if it escalated, and if he was attacking you and your family, the only option left to you was euthanasia. You would take that option.
Mm-hmm.
You would put the dog to sleep. You wouldn't torture him. And I think it's the same thing with people that are irredeemable. So when I see terms like Gehenna, used in the Bible, I understand that, Valley of Hinnom, that was a place where criminals who didn't warrant graves, their dead bodies were thrown there, and fires were kept consistently burning.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Never was a live person thrown in there.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So the symbol is that of eternal destruction, not of eternal torture. And that's sort of how I view which is why I view annihilationism that way, that God isn't going to torture people forever. He's just going to sort of end their lives. And then those who believe in universal reconciliation, have a further, addendum to that, which is something that I'm fascinated by. I don't know where I fall on that slide, but I'm interested. I'm interested in hearing both sides of the argument and sort of making up my own mind as to which makes the most sense from a scriptural standpoint.
Which from everything you've shared so far, I would say you're certainly wanting Scripture as your ultimate authority on the source. So you don't seem to be going where you don't see Scripture. I noticed you used verses to support annihilationism in the book. It's not a position I'm at yet, but I understand. I agree with you on the sense of it seems like it would be the more loving route to go, I'm yet to be there fully in Scripture, so I have a lot more study to do because I still see it in Scripture as not being annihilationism, but other people now, it seems to be a growing movement. There's whole websites now called which are pushing this doctrine. One's called Rethinking Hell. So I was wanting to study it up a lot more, and then eventually get someone from there to talk to me about it. We'll see where we go on that. I just think it was interesting that you got that in the book, and it could definitely be something that, like, I wouldn't share it for myself until I believe it.
Yeah.
But it seems as if someone's reading your book and they're not a believer and they see that, it could be an easy thing for them to like, oh, okay, well, I can buy into this a little bit more now. Because it seems more receptive. It seems more receptive.
Right. And I think people who think they know what Christianity is about really don't. They don't realize just how much depth there is and how much healthy debate there has been over the years. And I said specifically healthy debate because there's a lot of nonsense in the media that's very unhealthy, debate-wise and controversy. That's not what I mean. There have been so many amazing, scholarly, in-depth things written over the centuries that we're still parsing through, and we're still people who think they know Christianity but really haven't delved into it don't know. You don't know, and it's worth exploring because it's an amazing world. If you're interested in just learning, just in general, if you're just interested in learning new things and exploring.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Next song, Hand of Doom. This, for a while, I would say would be my favorite song, but I've moved it to War Pigs. I don't know what caused the shift. It's definitely not the lyrics. Something changed the shift for me. Hand of Doom, again, lots of layers, lots of meanings. It's very clear, though, it's about drug addiction, and in the context of the album and even some of the lines in the song, which you pointed out, it seems to be about a person that gets into drugs because they were involved, likely based on the time of when the album came out, the Vietnam War.
Hand of Doom. So it became the sort of go-to, almost the Bible of what's really going on, and he traces the history back. Now, it's not to say that there are not chemical hooks for some people. There does appear to be a percentage of people. It does appear to be a minority, however, in which chemical hooks are a factor. The majority, it's a different issue. And this is the sad reality. You asked about, well, how then does the church handle drug addicts? I think we need to start at a very, foundational building block. Jesus' command was to love your neighbors as yourself. I don't think there are any exceptions to that rule. And when we understand that drug addicts, by and large, come from some form of trauma, usually in their childhood, the idea of punishing them further, the idea of locking them away in prisons and preventing them from getting jobs when they get out of prison is really barbarous and also ultimately ineffective. It hasn't solved the problem. In fact, the problem is far worse than it ever has been.
Yeah.
So the war on drugs has been a monumental failure on so many levels. It's also single-handedly created a criminal empire that is vast. And then on top of that, or contrary to that, what we're seeing in countries that have either legalized drugs or taken away any criminal persecution or prosecution of drug addicts, Portugal and Uruguay, we're seeing drug use plummet. We're seeing people come off of heroin, find work. You know, the infrastructure, the money that was going towards prosecution is going towards rehabilitation and changing the cage, as you very aptly noted earlier, making people back, bringing them back into society, enabling them to work. It's working. That is working. So check out the book. Check out Chasing the Scream by Johan Hari, because he explains it far better than I ever could.
Reading your book, I don't know exactly what my position would have been on legalizing certain drugs or even, imprisonment or not, but I probably would have leaned a little bit more towards, don't make it legal, don't throw them, put them in prison. But just a little bit of your book I read, just the little bit you wrote and the stuff you cited, I was like, hey, that makes sense. It's good to know that this has worked elsewhere. It's clearly not helping right now. Right. And if you are trapped in it, you can't go get help because now I just criminalized myself. And to be honest, if you legalized heroin right now, it's not like I'm going to go to the 7-Eleven and buy some, It's like, so it really, and it puts you in a position where if you are getting it, you got to deal with this drug system that you're talking about in terms of all the dealers and stuff. And it's, just really very interesting take on it. I walked away with some new insights on that. I also walked away with a new insight. Same thing, you keep talking about duality for every song. There are two hands in Sabbath. And you talked about not just with this song, but throughout their whole 8-album canon, these two hands, the hand of doom and then the hand of God. So how are these two present within the Sabbath canon?
Well, they both offer similar rewards. They both offer escape from pain, a heavenly experience, and a form of community. But behind the one, behind the one turns out to be a mask, and that's, when he removes the mask, it's the fates of death and suffering and decay, and that's the snare, of artificial forms of escape. Volume 4 is all about that. Volume 4 really is, it's written from the perspective of whereas the first 3 albums are written almost from a higher perspective. It's Sabbath sort of giving counsel and giving warning. Volume 4 is written from the perspective of those sort of on the earth suffering, who have gotten involved in all these false forms of escape. And that's such a fascinating, completely different approach to warning people, and a very valid one, I think, as well. Snowblind, that song in particular, is a perfect sort of encapsulation of that idea. You cannot, if you choose a counterfeit salvation, you will be burned in the end. And that's not just drugs that we're referring to, because as a society we have lots of different addictions and drugs and idols, essentially, if you're taking it to a biblical perspective.
Many different things that master your reality, that become your master, and without them, you're interesting stuff. All right, so we're on the last song because, like I said, there's nothing for Rat Salad. Fairies wear boots. So, just 2 more questions. Fairies wear boots. In paraphrase, the song is about a guy that sees a fairy with boots dancing with a dwarf, and he goes to see a doctor about this, and the doctor says that he's been tripping too much. That's kind of the straightforward reading that I get and paraphrase of the whole thing. So somehow the straightforward narrative, you got a slew of interpretations from it. Can you mention just a few of these and which one you think's the most likely interpretation? If you were going to stake one on yourself, like, this is how I think it should be.
I'm not being difficult when saying I don't want to commit to a single one, because I think I think a lot of them have validity to them.
Okay.
But you've got, again, fans have made certain conclusions based upon which interpretations they've heard from the band, and then they think it's just a simple thing. So Tony Iommi, the band's lead guitarist, has said that he thinks it was about Ozzy and Geezer tripping one night in a park and seeing something.
Mm-hmm.
So, a drug trip. Geezer has come up with this very conflicting idea that it was about fighting a group of skinheads after a concert. Ozzy, who wrote the lyric, has no recollection of it, depending on when you ask him. There are times where he has a vague memory of it being about, LSD. As it turns out, when you look at Geezer's very specific as to the incident, and we know when all the shows kind of fall in the timeline. And we know when Fairies Wear Boots was written. Fairies Wear Boots is an old song. That's a 1969 song.
Mm-hmm.
There's an old demo of it that has yet to be released. But that song could have been on the first album. So his theory doesn't hold up timeline-wise, that the skinhead incident came later. It could have been earlier skinheads, but the specific show he mentions doesn't quite work out. And Tony mentions a specific park where he thinks Ozzy and Geezer tripped out on, but that show, that park, again, was much later timeline-wise. All right, so their memories could be faulty. That's fair. I mean,
It's
who
the
was
60s.
remembers? Yeah. But then Bill comes in, and Bill's great because Bill doesn't spoil the mystery of the song. In fact, he concludes that he throws in his own thing. He concludes that, well, it's a little bit of this and it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of what Tony said. It's a little bit of what Geezer said. But it brings me back to our time spent in Hamburg in the red light district in 1969. And if you know what the red light district was in Hamburg, that was sort of the mile of sin. And that's a whole other interpretation, and you could see why the band sort of didn't go there. It's a more it's about what they saw in the clubs, basically, what was sort of going on there. But I'm glad he doesn't conclude it there. He then goes on to say a lot of it was sort of the smoking dope and magical content. What does that mean? Magical content. Wow. You're seeing, what does that mean? It's a song about you're seeing fairies, and then the doctor.
All right, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties that occurred near the end there. So you lost one of the questions I gave about Hand of Doom, but you get where Joe picked up answering it halfway through. And then you lost some of the end questions with the song Fairies Wear Boots, which I'm really sad about. But you know what? The stuff I asked him was really things that were like just going over the various interpretations of the song Fairies Wear Boots. So if you want to know those interpretations, I just recommend that you get Joe Bongiorno's book, Black Sabbath, The Illustrated Lyrics, Volume 2, Songs of protest and apocalypse. I hope you've heard enough from this interview that you want to get that book yourself. And the fun thing about it is the stuff I think he shared in this interview, most of it isn't in the book. I tried to design most of these questions to pull out things that weren't in the book, questions I really had after reading his text. So if you've listened to this, it's not like you've gotten most of the book. Really, you've gotten almost none of the book because you don't have the pictures and you didn't get the bulk of the lyrics. You only got a few bit of the lyrics of the actual songs. And the book was like over 300 pages, if I remember correctly, or it was just shy of 300 pages. It's around the 300-page mark. So there's a whole lot there. And these pages, it's like a normal full-size print page book. So there's a whole lot in there. If you liked what you heard, there's a lot more there for you to dig into. Even if you're not a Black Sabbath fan, even if you've never even heard their music, just hearing the lyrics and dissecting the lyrics through this process Joe has, it's just, you can learn a lot because he really connects it to history, to theology, to real life political and social issues. So there's a lot there, I think, for every reader, and I highly recommend it to go get Joe's book. And that's at the Royal Publisher of Oz. That's one way to get it, or just search Black Sabbath The Illustrated Lyrics. You'll find his website. If you search Black Sabbath The Illustrated Lyrics on Amazon, you'll find the book there too. So I recommend looking up Joe. He has a Facebook page too for Black Sabbath Illustrated Lyrics, as well as the Royal Publisher of Oz. Both of those are pretty easy to find by searching. One of the last questions that cut off was the song Fairies Wear Boots has lots of interpretations of what the song could be about. It could be about a guy that just had a really bad acid trip, or maybe there actually is something supernatural to the world. There actually are fairies. Or maybe the fairies actually aren't real fairies, but just referring to sort of the white supremacist type people. I guess a term for them was fairies. And how they were known to wear boots. So some British slang there. So there's a lot going on with that song and how it could be interpreted. Is it a straightforward narrative, or is there something more magical, as Bill Ward alluded to when he spoke of the song? So from these interpretations, Joe said, in a sense, Black Sabbath are really talking about the importance of story in our culture, as well as the importance of mystery, exploration, and enjoyment for their own sakes. And I asked him, is that the central exhortation of the whole album? And if I remember correctly, Joe sort of said, yeah, it could be. If not, pointing us to that just in general throughout the rest of their canon. So guys, just embrace the unknown and explore. Enjoy life. Don't be afraid to dig into art that may be secular, because good art, hopefully, if done right, should reflect and point to the goodness and beauty of God's creation, and should have some underlying truth to it, if not truth, that can be connected to the Bible, like what Joe was showing from these Black Sabbath lyrics, although with Geezer Butler being the lyricist and admitting that this stuff comes from the Bible. Maybe it's easier to see with Sabbath if you have the eyes to see what's beyond meets the eye, right? So anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Sorry I got cut off at the end. I really enjoyed it. If you're listening in the podcast version, you can actually go on YouTube, and if you want to rewatch it, take notes on anything, since you maybe were listening in your car, you can see it on YouTube. I actually filmed it through a Skype interview. So, guys, thanks so much for listening, helping make Reconnect what it is. This was episode 100. It's been a joy of mine, good hobby of mine, and I hope to continue it. I got episodes 101 and 102 already in the bag. And if you want to give me feedback, it's at andy@contradictmovement.org. You can send feedback to andy@contradictmovement.org. You can get more show notes at andyrasman.com. I have a Reconnect link there where all the episodes are in the Reconnect category, and they usually have additional links if you want to know more about the things that were discussed here. So always I recommend going there to check out more if you're just one of those iTunes people and just get the MP3. All the links are on iTunes. So please go to andyrasman.com and check that out. And also on my YouTube channel, which is my name, Andy Rasman, WRASMAN. The episodes are being put on there too, and there's a Reconnect playlist, and the Reconnect playlist there with each episode. The descriptions usually have some links as well, so you can go there for additional input most of the time. All right, guys. Love you so much. Just remember, it's through Christ and Christ alone and His saving work that we're reconnected into the right relationship with the Lord.
Your mission, if you choose to accept it, share this episode on all of your social media sites and with your email contacts, people who will benefit from listening to the show. Thank you for listening. Reconnect us, O Lord.